I'm joined now by the Minister of the Environment and Climate Change in this country, Catherine McKenna. Good to see you.
Great to be here.
Thanks for coming to speak with me. A couple of things I want to cover. We want to talk about the new trade deal and what's in there.
Great deal.
That's of importance to you and Canadians at large. We want to talk about the Environment Commissioner's report today, but I want to start off with the big LNG project out in British Columbia, formally sort of unveiled today. The federal government's putting up $275 million in support for that project. And I guess let's start with what effect you think that project will have as it creates nearly 9 million tons of carbon pollution a year by 2030, according to the Pembina Institute. What effect will that have on your federal climate plan and on BC's efforts to curb its own emissions?
So I actually want to start with how exciting it is. This is the largest single investment in Canada's history. And it might seem strange as the Environment Minister, but I always talk about the environment and the economy. We have to figure this out in the way forward. So it's a great project. It's going to bring in thousands of jobs. It's got Indigenous partnerships, which are really important. And of course, you need to look at the impact. There are emissions, significant emissions from this project, but two things. One, this is the most efficient, low GHG emitting project in the whole world, LNG project. So that is amazing when you look at that. Also, I spent a lot of time abroad, and we're all trying to figure this out. How do we transition to a low carbon future? It's going to take decades. And we know that LNG, can replace coal. So that's a really important point. Also, BC is very committed to climate change. I've had many discussions with the Minister of Environment there. And they're going to take action, and they, are very aware that they need to make sure that they're looking at how do they reduce their overall, greenhouse gases. But of course, they've got to look at jobs too.
Sure. So tell me how that works. So if you have a project like this that's going to create that much more of a carbon footprint, how does that affect? What does that mean for other industries and for a plan in general? Do you factor that? Have you factored that into a federal plan?
So first of all, when you look at a project, you always look at the greenhouse gas emissions overall in terms of the impact in Canada, but also, is this a good project? Are they doing everything they can to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions? So certainly you see about this project, as I say, the lowest emitting project. And then also, when you look at what BC is doing on climate change, they have a price on pollution. They've actually had a price on pollution for a decade, and it's working. So they've been able to reduce their emissions at the same time while growing their economy. And the minister and the premier have been clear. Like, they know that they need to take action on climate change. They're looking at what additional measures they could take. And overall, we of course consider every project in light of our climate plan, and it fits within our climate plan. Of course, it's always a consideration, but I think that we can't lose sight of. We need to be figuring out how we move to a lower carbon future, and part of that is LNG. And if we're going to be looking at who should be supplying it, I'm very pleased that it's Canada with the lowest emitting facility.
Right. What about the argument? And we're starting to hear it more now, that the argument is that we can't look at what Canada's doing in isolation. So yes, there's an impact in British Columbia. There's a positive economic impact, obviously, with this, and some would argue there's a substantial negative impact in terms of emissions, but perhaps a positive impact at the other end in delivering natural gas, liquefied natural gas to Asian countries and having them reduce emissions. How important is that to the conversation?
You can't look at any of these in isolation. I go, internationally, and everyone's looking for solutions. And we've been really pushing internationally phasing out coal. So we have the Powering Past Coal Coalition. If you want to get countries off coal, they have to use something else. In some cases, it'll be renewables, and we would, love when countries are able to leapfrog to renewables. But sometimes it will be natural gas. And as I say, that it should be Canada's, because we're taking serious action on climate change. And so I would prefer lowest emitting facility. This is a project that brings partnerships with Indigenous peoples, and it brings really good jobs and investment. And it demonstrates that you can be serious about climate action, but you also can still get your resources to market.
Why do you think a project like this has managed successfully to garner the required, if I can describe it that way, the social license, the buy-in, when so many other, and you've said no to energy projects in your government. You're trying to get the Trans Mountain pipeline extension done. That's running into some rough waters. Why is this one going ahead?
Well, you know what I've learned in my job since I've been here, that you need to work hard with Indigenous peoples, with communities. They're not all against projects, but they want to make sure that it's something that's going to benefit them and that's not going to, harm the environment. That you need to also, make sure that you have a plan to tackle climate change. You need to, you need to be smart about how you do things. And we are rebuilding trust in an environmental assessment system. And we think that that is going to be part of the solution. I think in this project, it was a good project. They were able to bring folks together. Of course, there has to be the business case. Business case was clearly there. But, as we go forward, I think that we can do a better job. I think that we can bring folks together, that you can bring Indigenous peoples in early, that you can make sure that you're able to approve projects in a timely fashion. Businesses want certainty. That you can make sure that you're minimizing the environmental impact. And that's really my focus. My focus is making sure that good projects go ahead in a timely way while protecting the environment and while ensuring that we're working with Indigenous peoples.
Let's talk about the new trade agreement with the United States. There is a chapter in there on the environment, but nothing about climate change. And their critics are saying that, look, the Canadian side promised to go in there with a progressive agenda to get action on climate change, to get action on a bunch of things, but there's no mention of climate change in the agreement. How come?
Well, first of all, I think everyone should step back. So I'm going to start again that this is also a great announcement. Getting a NAFTA, the new name, what is it? We'll start with Canada. Canada, USA, Mexico deal.
Wait a minute, you can't change the name like
extraordinary.
that.
You know what? A name is just a name.
Okay.
But this amazing deal, it's really important to our economy. It's really important to investor certainty, and it was important that we get a good deal. And we got a good deal. And one of the things that was good as part of this deal is we have an environment chapter. This is the first time ever that the environment chapter is within the body of the agreement. There is a dispute settlement mechanism. It's got ambitious provisions. It provides for a public submissions process. So that's all really good. Also, there was concerns about investors being able to sue governments for taking action, for example, to protect the environment. That's no
Chapter
longer
11.
part of this.
That was Chapter 11 now.
Chapter
It's
11.
not in this new deal.
So it's not in this. So that's a really good environmental story. And in terms of climate action, it includes provisions on air quality, includes provisions on protecting biodiversity. So certainly, a lot of the things that are part of climate action.
But the critics say those are they're aspirational. Like where's the enforcement mechanisms in there to say, yeah, it says that pollution's bad for public health. What can you do to force states to actually take action that curbs pollution?
When you step back, why do you have environmental provisions in trade deals? Because you want it to be a race for the top, not a race to the bottom. So it's very clear that we have our right to regulate. We are going to continue taking action on climate change. That's very clear. We just had a G7 meeting, and the U.S. was there. And we talked about how important it was to take action on climate change, the Paris Agreement, what we're doing at home, what we're doing abroad, the economic opportunity. And so, I think this is a great deal. We also have an agreement, a side agreement that we're also working on that will have some of the details. We're working on getting climate change reflected there. But I think overall, this is a real win.
Did you push for a climate change chapter?
We would never, no. We were pushing for an environment chapter that took action, including on air quality, on climate change. But those are really caught. When you talk about air quality
why didn't you push
standards,
the Americans on a climate change chapter? It's like, we need that.
Well, we would never have a chapter. Climate change is part of an environment chapter.
Okay.
That was always the case. I think many people, to be honest, probably some of the people who may be, criticizing, I would say that they probably didn't think we were going to get an environment chapter, because that was something that was, that was really clear, and we were clear from the start that we wanted it in the body of the agreement. And to be honest, what helped was we had Chrystia Freeland, the minister, saying, we need to have this as part of the agreement. And we also I had an advisory committee that included premiers, past premiers.
Right.
So I had Gordon Campbell from British Columbia, I had Pierre-Marc Johnson from Quebec, who were also advising us and really focused on how do we get this. I had great negotiators too. But this is a huge win.
You got the environment, but the climate, to be honest, anything on climate change that would have been substantial wasn't going to fly with President Trump and the U.S. administration.
Let's be clear. Their position, is different from ours on climate change. And we're still taking action, and we're still taking action in the U.S. There's a lot of focus always on the administration at the federal level, but,
right, but we have lots of relationships with states.
We have an agreement with the states representing almost 50% of the economy that we are going to take action, joint action on climate change, looking at sharing best practices on pricing pollution. So there's lots of action that is going on, but this is a real win because we need to, one, make sure that we have our right to protect the environment. And so now there's no way that you can have challenges against us because we're taking action to protect the environment. We want to act jointly on key priorities from air quality to marine litter to animals, species at risk. And also we want to make sure that it's public and transparent and public can have a submissions process. And of course, there's also dispute settlement. So having that in the body of the agreement shows clearly environment, economy, they go together. 21st century, you can't have a trade agreement without an environment
Just
chapter.
a few seconds left. The Environment Commissioner tabled her fall report today. She's coming up a little later on our program. And she's going to tell us about how Environment Canada and Health Canada are failing to really manage the toxins problem. And you identify the toxins, you might come up with an action plan for how to deal with it, but there's no follow-up. You don't know how successful you're being at actually getting businesses to dispose of them or getting them out of the system as a threat to Canadians. What's the response?
So look, I always appreciate her reports. I think the Commissioner has a very important role. And I think she acknowledged that we are taking action and there's been greater enforcement than ever and prosecutions. We've also done things like ban asbestos, ban microbeads, and we care about the health of Canadians and addressing toxic substances. Is there more we can do? We're looking at her report. A lot of it is actually how we even communicate what we're doing and making sure that Canadians are aware that we're taking enforcement action, are aware what chemicals are problematic. And I think her report is good. We've certainly taken a very different tack than the previous government. We take this extremely seriously. We've invested in chemicals management. But is there more they can do? As the Commission would say, there is always more we can do. And I told her, look, we appreciate it. We also worked with our House of Commons committee. They had a report on what we can do more on chemicals management, and we're committed to doing more.
All right, Catherine McKenna, thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
Great, thank you.